Hi, everyone. I'm going to try really hard to get through this without crying, but if I start crying, just pretend it's not happening. So if I haven't already met you this weekend, my name is Megan, and I'm 23 years old, and I was diagnosed with a desmoid tumor in my shoulder when I was 10. Before I begin and get into the rest of it, I just want to take a moment to thank the DTRF, specifically Lynn, Debbie, and Cheney, for having me here today and for also all the support they give me and everyone else in this room over the years, and just for always being there. It's really an honor to be standing here today. And so far this weekend has been so insightful. And it's my first patient meeting and I've never experienced anything like it. So thank you to also all the deeply inspirational people I've met so far over this weekend. So I was diagnosed with my tumor back in 2011, which means that I've actually spent more of my life with my tumor than without it. It took me a really long time to understand the gravity of what I was going through, because at the age of 10, I didn't really understand how drastically my life was changing. I had my very first surgery that same year, which was a highly invasive surgery that they've spoken about a lot today, which involved breaking through my collarbone to get through to the tumor, after which I was left with virtually no muscle strength and very limited mobility. I vividly remember my first physiotherapy session after this surgery when they asked me to lift my arm as high as I could, and I couldn't move it at all. This surgery marked the beginning of many long years of MRIs, doctors' checkups, and physiotherapy appointments. Eventually, as we know all too well, an MRI showed some tumor recurrence and we were back to square one. I'm not going to bore you with the details because it's a long story, but over the past decade, I would say I've spent more of my time undergoing some sort of medical treatment. And most of the time, it felt like nothing was ever going to work. In 2021, I had my first round of cryoablation, which was minimally invasive, and I was up and running completely normally about 2 weeks later. It seemed to have worked at stabilizing the tumor. However, I spent the next 2 years experiencing completely debilitating pain in my shoulder and down my back, which I thought was just the price you pay for a treatment that works. But I was wrong. And in January 2023, halfway through my second year of university, I went in for my usual MRI, and it was bad news again. The pain that I had been experiencing was a result of the tumor growing. But there was good news. They felt optimistic that another, far more aggressive round of cryo would do the trick. So a month later, I pulled out of university temporarily and went home to give the cryo another go. And it worked. Sorry. A few months later, after a long and very painful recovery, in July of 2023, I had yet another checkup. I sat down in front of my doctor. The doctor pulled up the scans, turned the computer screen around to me and said, "It's dead. There's no tumor activity in sight." And he was right. I was looking at the scans and I just said, "Where is it?" Because usually, you can see a big bright mass, but there was nothing to be seen. So now I think we all know all too well that hearing the words "you're in the clear" as a desmoid patient is a bit of an empty promise. And I was, and I still am, very aware that no treatment is a proven cure, and that I am set to spend the rest of my life in and out of a doctor's office just in case. So that's pretty much where I'm at now in my desmoid journey. And I want to talk a little bit about the DTRF and my personal connection to the DTRF. So the DTRF has been a constant for me for as long as I can remember in my personal journey, and they hold an incredibly special place in my heart. Their main goal, as we know, is to raise funds to find a cure for desmoids. And I feel like many people can be a tiny bit skeptical of donating money to an organization like this and kind of wonder where exactly the money is going. But as someone who has been dealing with my tumor for over a decade, I've seen firsthand the impact of the research that the DTRF is funding. And I can assure you that the research is life-changing for people like me. Back when I was diagnosed, the highly invasive surgery that I told you about was almost always the first port of call after diagnosis. As we've seen today from all the amazing doctors that have spoken, it's generally not recommended anymore. There weren't that many options back then. Desmoids were extremely under-researched. They still are, but more so back then. And cryoablation, a treatment that wasn't even really in consideration when I was first diagnosed, is the first and only treatment that has worked at stabilizing and even partially shrinking my tumor. Without organizations like the DTRF, I firmly believe I wouldn't be where I am today, standing here with a stable tumor after 13 years. So naturally, a major part of my connection to the DTRF is through fundraising. Sorry. My parents have been fundraising for the DTRF for as long as I can remember. They've done some really impressive fundraisers. Their first one was a huge dinner and an auction, which actually took place 10 years ago this weekend. They also did backyard garden markets. One summer they committed to running, walking, and cycling hundreds of kilometers. And they've worked tirelessly to find creative new ways to fundraise over the years. For many years after my diagnosis, I found it extremely hard to talk about my illness, which meant that I generally wasn't that involved in the fundraising. I was about 14 years old when I first opened up to a friend about my tumor and the struggles I was experiencing in the face of it. Despite my fears of how she would react, she showed an unbelievable amount of compassion and understanding. And this conversation was the first time I started to understand that it was okay to talk about what I was going through, and that talking to the right people really helps. As the years went on, I've slowly figured out how to open up to people and how to talk about my illness. And time again, my friends have blown me away with the time they dedicate to listening to me and to trying to understand how they can best support me. My best friend even flew out to keep me company after my cryo last year. So, cast your minds back to about a year ago. Around this time, I texted one of my friends, Laura, and I said, "Hey, would you call me crazy if I said I wanted to run a half marathon soon?" I had been running extremely casually for a couple of months at that stage and had absolutely no idea what I was getting myself into. It seemed very doable. She told me to go for it. Why not? Somewhat skeptically. And a few weeks later, I decided that if I was going to take on such a challenge, I may as well do it for a good cause. So in January 2024, this year, I decided to fundraise for the DTRF alongside the run. I feel very lucky that Laura, the friend who told me to go for it, ended up signing up to run with me, as well as Maeve, the friend who flew out to keep me company after the cryo only a year before. So last week, before coming over to Houston, I was talking to my dad and we were talking about fundraising. And he was saying in a dad way, I don't know anything about fundraising after all the fundraisers they've done. He said that the only thing he's learned and that he knows for sure is that when you're fundraising, you have to keep sharing the story and just keep sharing it online and just see where it goes. And so coincidentally, that's exactly what I did back then. And about 6 weeks out from the half marathon, I put together a post and shared it across my social media platforms. And I reshared it every few days up until the day of the race. And with the unwavering love and support and donations and shares from my close family and my friends, and also more distant connections, my story reached over 1,000 people, and we ended up fundraising just short of $5,000 in 10 weeks. But fundraising isn't just about the money, it's also about spreading awareness. One of the major barriers to finding a cure is a lack of understanding. So on a level, raising awareness is absolutely crucial. Over the years, I've faced misunderstanding of my illness time and time again, which has led to unfair treatment in many situations throughout my life. All things that could have been avoided with more awareness from the people involved. I know that's much easier said than done, but that doesn't make it any less important. So, some of you might be wondering, if I've been given the all clear by my doctors, why do I still feel the need to fundraise? To put it bluntly, I think it would be selfish and ignorant for me to stop fundraising just because I've found a treatment that works for my tumor. I can't emphasize enough that an all clear right now doesn't mean that that will be the case for the rest of my life. Plus, there are so many desmoid patients in this room and in the rest of the world who are still fighting to find a treatment that will work for them. Until we find a cure that works for everyone, there's no justification in stopping fundraising. Secondly, I think that raising awareness through fundraising is so important for patients of rare diseases to feel seen and supported, and it plays a huge role in reminding us that we're not alone. The support I've felt from my close friends, my family, and people that I don't even know that well through fundraising has been absolutely mind-blowing every single time. And I never feel as seen as when I embrace vulnerability and open up to the people around me. So as I come to the end of this talk, I do want to be clear that standing up here and talking about my journey has not and will never encapsulate the fear, desperation, resentment, and loneliness, to keep the list short, that I and every other patient feels during their journey. It's taken me many years to reach a point where I am, more often than not, somewhat at peace with the unfairness of being the unlucky one in a million. The more time I spend in the clear from my tumor, the harder it becomes to imagine yet another tumor recurrence and having to undergo any more years of treatments. The more time spent living a somewhat tumor-free life, the more there is for me to lose if the tumor comes back. And this fear will live in my mind for the rest of my life, unless we find a cure. A treatment that works for some people is not a cure for everyone. And that's why fundraising and advocating is so important. Because I might be in the clear for now, but I will spend the rest of my life in an MRI scanner every few months, just in case. And living with that just in case and the underlying fear that comes with it is simply not good enough for me or for anyone else. Thank you. That's me and my lovely friends. I know we look very happy, but about 3 or 4 minutes before that, I was crying, saying I couldn't keep going. So